It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. We were just laughing on the other side. I think they gave me credit for running the Economic Development Corporation in Newark, which I did not. But I did have the pleasure of living in this great city and working at Brick City Development Corporation. That's what it was called at the time, under the Booker administration, to which my colleague over here, Laniera Richardson, ended up running as well. So we have lots of history, and I can tell you that Prudential and Audible and so many others have been unwavering in their commitment to this city, and the city's soul and grit and innovation continue to be a model. So I completely understand why Aspen chose this as an inaugural location for this particular conversation. My name is Garnisha Isidoro. I lead Bloomberg Philanthropy's Greenwood Initiative. Our work is a national portfolio named in homage of the community in North Tulsa. And over the last few years, we've committed nearly $1 billion to wealth building initiatives. We are so excited to I get to lead work that is focused on a wide range of issues. Just to share a few, we made the largest ever investment in endowments of historically Black medical schools last year with the goal to strengthen the school's ability to deliver culturally competent doctors and, provide preventative care and increase the flourishing and well-being of medically underserved communities. We also seeded into the creation of the Black Wealth Data Center. Tanae Traylor, who is the executive director, is sitting right here. Tanae, wave your hand. I'm going to encourage each of you all to become members of the Black Wealth Data Center. The team has created a comprehensive database of data around 6 wealth topics. You can download it. You can insert it into your presentations. We know that so many of you are case making for the work that you do, and we wanted to make that as easy as possible. Tanae also will be able to give you an update on some of the new tools and features that are there. As our team continues to look for opportunities to leverage philanthropic capital, we know a few things. One, we know there's a need for innovation, like the conversations that we've been having over the last 2 days. We know we must center a conversation in ownership and have the boldness to ask for whom, ownership for whom. We also know that place-based initiatives are quite essential, and having the data and the nuance of the community's needs and the barriers and the legacy of inequity is also important as we think about the future. I am so excited that we have panelists today who are committed, not only committed, I would say at the forefront of some of the most exciting innovations that are happening right now in communities across the country. I also, point to a couple of examples beyond those that are going to be discussed today. In Cincinnati, a city that we, are so excited about, they have leveraged some of their programming and research to look at and engage residents within their cities to ask, what are the major barriers for wealth building? And one of the things that they came up with was that medical debt was a huge burden for residents across the city. And the mayor and his team were able to create partners to really get after that medical debt. And today they have a program, nearly $222 million in debt has been relieved for over 100,000 residents. And so it's important, yes, that deserves a hand clap. It's important for us to look for models like this. Newark is also on the same path, having engaged their residents and asked them what is most important to them. They have prioritized legacy planning. They've also prioritized financial counseling for all of the city's residents. So these programs underscore the need for truth, for addressing economic challenges over the long term. We know actionable data is required. We know we need community-driven solutions and shared investment in scaling the most innovative approaches. We are fortunate today to have a panel to get into it. Our collective challenge and opportunity is to design an economy and innovations that offer the opportunity for everyone to have a stake. Thank you so much for allowing me to just reflect quickly and to bring up our moderator and panelists.
Thank you so much. Choose your seat. Greetings, agents of impact. See, you know what I'm talking about. I'm David Bank, and I have the privilege of being the founder and editor of Impact Alpha. And I think some of you know us, and maybe read us. Maybe some of you have been in Impact Alpha, written for Impact Alpha, been covered in Impact Alpha. So I'm delighted to be here. We've been leaning into the ownership economy, as we call it, for quite a number of years now. And I've been delighted, as maybe you have as well, the extent to which it's been a theme of this conference. And before we get going, you've been to some other panels on ownership. So who would say that they're like expert in ownership now? Who's still learning? Okay. Should we get just a little sense too, like what hats you wear in your work? If you're sort of a advocate, activist, policy, educator, journalist person, raise your hand. Okay. If you're a manager or a fund manager, an investor, raise your hand.
Oh, let me take a picture.
Actually, this is the one you want. If you're an asset allocator or an LP, raise your hand. There you go. But really, actually, and I think this has come through in the last couple of days as well. You know, ownership is really a means to an end, and I think in the main stage panel that the governor was talking about inclusive prosperity. We've been calling it shared prosperity, and it's really ownership is sort of a means of the pre-distribution of wealth, not the redistribution of wealth. With a hat tip to Delilah. Is Delilah here? Some of you know Delilah Rothenberg from the pre-distribution initiative, and really it's about kind of reversing this trend. And we were talking a major sort of systemic risk factor of the concentration of wealth. And so what we're going to try to talk about today is how the sort of mechanisms, and try to get as practical as we can about the mechanisms that can be deployed to reverse this concentration of wealth and get to a much more equitable distribution. And obviously ownership is the key tool for that. I'll just name you all, and then we'll start. To my immediate right is Lanier Richardson, and Lanier I always thought was a Chicago guy because he's got an initiative which he'll describe called Chicago Trend. But then I come to find he's actually a Newark guy, so we'll get into that, Lanier. And then Catherine Gottschalk is the Chief Investment Officer of Calvert Impact and an old friend. And Santos Ramdos is the, what do you call yourself, CEO of Gary Community Ventures in Gary Community Ventures, which is a foundation and a family office in Denver, Colorado, and also has been tracking with us and we with him on this ownership economy for a long time. So this is a panel of a standout panel. But Lanier, let's start with you, and let's start kind of getting grounded locally here in Newark. And I know the mayor has tried to sort of position Newark as an ownership city, and just give us a little bit of the lay of the land. You're the head of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers, so presumably you know the lay of the land here. So why is Newark becoming kind of a center of all this?
Well, I learned, I moved here 11 years ago, almost to the day, 16 years ago, almost to the day, and learned to be very careful about turf, right? So Newark has embraced me. I always say I fell in love with the city, I fell in love in the city, and this is a workplace where I've done a lot of work and happy to be here. For the last 11 years, I've had a dual role of leading the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development, and being a faculty member at Rutgers Business School. And the center's work was about connecting entrepreneurship and economic development, about strategies. I saw Makelia Davis in the audience here somewhere, and she's the first person that would say, "What if we did capitalism a little differently?" Just this little thing, right? And that really is at the center of what our center is about. There was a professor at Rutgers who drew a circle around the business school, and basically did some analysis that there was, a lack of home ownership, higher poverty, lack of entrepreneurship. And she made the connection to what entrepreneurship and how economic development outcomes sort of work together. And so that's been the work of our center of, how do you create more entrepreneurship initially. I've had fun in sort of expanding that with talking about access to capitals, how to do research and organize initiatives that would jumpstart, ownership, and it's continuing to grow that way. So there is a moment now, I believe, because of advocates like the Mayor Baraka, but because of advocates, many of whom are in this room, that have said, what if we democratized ownership so that capitalism worked for more people? And that's been inspiring work for me.
Okay, now put on your trend hat. And commercial real estate often gets, I think, short shrift maybe in the ownership conversation. Employee ownership is very, very hip now, and home ownership obviously is the mainstay. But commercial real estate, you've been making the argument, is a huge opportunity for wealth building.
Yeah, so in our work with entrepreneurship, everyone, wealth is created by owning assets that generate revenue, assets that appreciate over time, assets that may have tax advantages. And so initially, clearly in America, that's home ownership. Our work at Rutgers initially was around helping more business, foster more business ownership. And then 2020 happened. George Floyd was murdered. There was civil unrest in the very neighborhoods where we were working to help entrepreneurship, flourish. And I remember this guy standing in front of a little strip mall, and he said, "Don't wreck my business, it's black owned." And what I remember thinking was like, well, who owns the property? And as you know, in communities of color, your first impression of a neighborhood is the commercial property. If it's blighted or disinvested or under-retailed in some way, it becomes a liability as opposed to an asset. And so our work became, well, what if local people had an opportunity to have a little ownership stake? Would they patronize it and protect it and respect it in a different way? And so the innovation was figuring out how to register an offering with the SEC, to be able to, we found a platform, I call it a fintech tool, and then to do old school community organizing where you're educating people about what's a rent roll and how do you get a return and what's long-term ownership, passive ownership mean. And what we found is all of these other, impact measures, that there's community cohesion, that we now have 11-year-old, 12-year-old young people on the calls asking questions. What's a rent roll? That we've been able to get returns for people, 3, 4, 5x their investment return, return on their investment. And so over time, the thought is crime will decrease in neighborhoods. Cities are investing. It's now a different way of economic development strategy, and it's individuals, right? And it's a multiple. Right now we have 385 community investors, but it's a multiple of them. It's, they now know someone who owns. When's the last time someone knocked on your door and said you want to own something in your neighborhood, right? They now know someone that says, I have a little ownership stake there. My grandmother, my auntie, my church member, my fraternity brother, my prom date, right? They know somebody with a connection to ownership, and there's I think a multitude of additional outcomes that will result from that.
So just to be super clear about it, 385 community investors. Those are like neighbors of the properties themselves, and they put in small amounts
Correct.
of money, and you've just paid out some of them.
Correct. So we have now the vehicle, and it's like anything else, it's more complicated, but we have a set of impact investors who've invested on average $1 million. Dodge Foundation, Cerner Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Penny Pritzker's Family Foundation. My favorite impact investors, Order of Nuns. At one meeting, they were like, "Oh, I like that." And I'm like, "I gotta know more nuns, right?"
Sisters rock.
The sisters are pretty cool. But what that allowed us to do is we can acquire, we can do the due diligence, do the financial underwriting, structure the transactions, and then do these meetings, as I said, in church basements, in apartment building common areas. I did a meeting in a barber shop in the community arts center. And we have individuals who've invested on average $2,200, most of them $1,000. And what that does, as I said, it's even if we're right? So somebody invests $2,000. If we're remarkably right, they'll earn $10,000. But the generational wealth change is you now have young people who are on the investor calls. We have a quarterly investor call, have an in-person meeting. They're asking the CEO questions. They're meeting a black architect and engineer and the appraiser and small business owners. And again, they're connected to ownership in a different way that I think over time, our goal is to have 1,000 people and 10,000 kids that have a connection to what's a rent roll, how do you evaluate, what's a K1, how do you evaluate the tenancy? That stuff is, I think, will have, implications many years to come.
Terrific. Santos, you've put something like $50 million to work in this ownership space, and just tell us sort of how what you're seeing and sort of how you evaluate the opportunities.
Yeah, Santosh Ramdas. I'm apparently the CEO of Gary Community Ventures, according to David Bank. Now that he said it, it's formal. So, our origin story is that I run a private family office and a private foundation out of Colorado and Denver, and our founder had this vision of not wanting to hold on to his legacy permanently. So he said, in 2035, we want you to move our assets from our balance sheet into the community's balance sheet. He did that in 2014 and left us with that mandate with a 2-page document. And so he didn't lay out a business plan. There was no exactly how you do it, but he hinted on the idea of we should think about asset building and ownership for households and communities. And our founders are really passionate about kids and households, and they saw that having intergenerational prosperity and having a home where the parents have to worry about where their safety net is a huge part of kids growing up healthy in a loving and beautiful family. And so we took that mandate and we started exploring a little bit, and intentionally we started doing some early transactions in home ownership and employee ownership. And when I say we, I mean there's one person in our team, Catherine Toner. I was talking to her before saying, hey, you don't have to come to this conversation. You've heard this before. And she's like, I'm curious how you frame this. And I realized that's when I'm like, wait, I'm the person who frames it. You're the person who actually makes the art. So if you want to know anything else more in detail, just talk to her. But we started doing these transactions, and eventually what we realized is we started talking to other investors, Prudential, Wes, a few other folks. And we all were doing these transactions with a fundamental belief that we didn't think that wage income was the path into economic mobility and wealth creation in the U.S. And we also realized that at that point we were all focused on the wealth gap, but also bridging the racial equity conversation around wealth as being a driver of racial equity. And so we were all investing in these funds and opportunities intentionally outside of our own corners. There was no movement, there was no coordination, there was none of this, right, yet. And we realized there's a big need for a Big Tent. And part of that is your reporting at Impact Alpha. And also, at that point, the ownership movement was very kind of stratified. The employee ownership people didn't talk to the home ownership people, didn't talk to the individual financial assets, because we thought of them as independent structures. And so it was almost growing out of the forest in a way that the movement came out. And it just really defined Gary fundamentally in what we do. Because it's now given us the agency to say, our vision is when we go away in 10 years, that our balance sheet is nourished in community so that every Colorado household has a basic pool of essential wealth. So it's not about minimum wage anymore, it's about having minimum wealth and essential wealth it's a basic need for every household. So that's the direction we're headed towards. And then all along the way, we've done some work last year. I think many of you all in the room joined us. We did a convening, and Emily Williams from our team helped make that happen, to bring together this kind of loosely knit group of people into what we're calling it a movement. And just like any other movement, there's no like definition of what this is in a stringent way. And the standard is see what your values are, honor the fact that this is about households having access to assets that appreciate in value, and build your own way into it. But I think that's where, I know it's kind of a broader answer, but I just wanted to give you the arc of the origin story. And along the way, we've done about $50 million roughly of investments across all the assets, everything from individual financial assets. We have a baby bond pilot in Colorado. We've done a bunch of work on renter wealth building, and I know Enterprise, and Chris is in the room, we're investors in that fund, which is shared real estate. Home ownership, we've done a ton of work on home ownership, happy to talk about it. And lastly, we're invested in 4 other employee ownership funds across the market. So we're in it, we're putting it to work, and we're hoping that others would join us in this movement.
So yeah, movement. You had a piece with Smith Adas at Wes a number of years ago saying we were on the cusp of an ownership movement. So now we're declaring the movement.
I don't know who gets to declare a movement. If you want it to be me, I would be honored.
Okay.
But I don't think I'm qualified.
Well, but
I would nominate Linaire. He seems like more like a movement declarer. But and the thing about a movement is it's messy. I mean, but yeah, I think this. We gotta mess some shit up. I mean, this is it. Like we got one shot at this.
Well, speaking of messy, so one of the things that comes up, and I know you've thought about this, is the sort of distinction between kind of deep and small and shallow and big. And I wonder whether you think that's a false dichotomy in some way, in terms of ownership strategies, or whether how you sort of think about going big but also going deep.
I love that question. You didn't. This is not in the notes. Did you just make that up? I don't think we should have a broad and broad. Was it shallow and broad? Is that what it is? Yeah. I mean, I think that the underlying ethos here is we want every household to have access to things that we take for granted. At least most folks in this room do. And so, yes, the version that we care about is anytime we make an ownership investment, the question we're asking is there a meaningful improvement in household wealth generation, right? So we have a Black home ownership fund called the Deerfield Fund for Black Wealth, and in the first 3 years, we've seen about $25,000 of equity improvement for every household in the fund. Similarly, for APIS and Heritage, you've seen meaningful equity improvement in similar scale, right? So I think our minimum viable depth that we would require is that does this add at least a few between $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $100,000 of net wealth in the household, and that I think should be the ask. And at the same time, we want to do it at a dramatic, scalable level. And I will say, like, we're happy to come back to the question around how do we leverage policy to get there, but I don't want to jump the gun a little bit.
That one was on the list.
Okay. Hopefully, you'll come back to some questions on the list.
But Catherine, help us kind of draw this together from Calvert's point of view, because you see a lot of examples, and just maybe lay out some examples of successful ownership strategies.
Yeah. So Catherine Gottschalk, CIO at Calvert Impact. So I'm gonna go a little bit with, like, I think we need to think carefully about, like, I don't know that I like the broad and shallow so much, but by broadening, you're enabling kind of greater scale to the sort of the small and deep. So we've been around for 30 years, and what we're trying to do is transform capital markets. Modest goal, right? But we were birthed out of one of the first socially responsible mutual fund companies who had kind of crazy idea that people ought to be able to, through their investment, really align with their values. And so for 30 years, we have been providing ways for individuals and institutions to invest in alignment with their values. So invest in our note, and we then, in turn, through our portfolio, invest in organizations around the globe, half of whom are in the US, really working on the ground to advance solutions to inequality and now climate change. And our perspective is sort of how do we move more capital at scale to these solutions, right? And I think I mean, I look across our portfolio, and it's a highly fragmented array of really some very small, very deep, right, solutions on the ground. And actually, I want to sort of survey, I think a group you missed in your kind of who's in the room is who's sort of on the ground moving solutions, like making it happen.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, so I think that there's I totally agree. I think we're in a moment, right? And I think we're in a moment because on the kind of negative side, this is one of the greatest risks that we hold in our society, to our economy, to our kind of culture. We're seeing it in the political realm. The massive inequality, right? We've really got to address this. I also think on the positive side, we're in a moment, we're looking at sort of generational wealth transfer that we have never seen. And yes, that is highly concentrated, but think about that as an opportunity, right? What if we were to really, I think the next generation and my gender care more, no offense to the other gender on the stage, about really aligning their investments with what they care about, right? So I think we have a real moment to unlock more of the 100 trillion of private wealth, locked up in the market in ways that are reaching that kind of deep on the ground solution. I think, the value of the Garys of the world and the Prudentials and others really demonstrating and showing that this is, that there are investable opportunities is invaluable, right? But we need like 1,000 more of you. And I think that I think we're in a moment where we really can think about how to create deeper, like more effective pathways to capital markets for some of these solutions. Not all of them, right? But like, how do we create a scaled REIT for the Chicago Trend model, right? We've got Chris and Renner Wealth Fund in the room. Like, how do we do that times 10? We've got Rock USA. I mean, we were one of your first lenders. We've got, you guys have reached 24,000 homeowners in cooperatively owned manufactured home communities. But the scale of the market there is enormous. You think about all of the single-family homes, talking about home ownership, that either non-performing loans or vacant properties get auctioned off to private equity funds every year. 40%, I think, is the stat, are owned by private equity. How do we create a scaled vehicle to compete there? To sort of redirect and structurally sort of supply with inventory all of the deep on the ground kind of solution makers with more assets, right? So I just think it's the moment for us to just think a little bit differently. We have a wonderful array of solutions for shared ownership and wealth generation. What we don't have is enough solutions that really scale those.
Well, so now we're getting, this is the meat of the discussion here, is exactly that. And you posed the question, but now let's see if we can at least brainstorm and imagine some answers. And you've always been my guide on sort of what would it take to make sort of institutional facing products that could then be intermediated into, I know that's your favorite word, into managers like Lanier and the other ones that you mentioned. So
yeah.
What does that actually mean?
Well, so let me give you an example, right? So we have about a $500 million portfolio, about 110 different sort of organizations that are reaching on the ground. And one of those in the sort of in our climate portfolio works on decarbonizing commercial real estate in the U.S., right? Which is a really interesting, very nerdy, very engineering grounded, kind of product that, when we started working with them about 7 years ago, we were really amazed that this is not just like that this doesn't have the scale that it should. It makes a ton of sense. You've got state-enabled legislation, talking about the policy, that sort of creates the opportunity for this product. It has a very sort of clear and impactful use of proceeds. It can be used only to improve the energy efficiency of real estate. And yet, there's basically no public capital markets kind of activity around this particular asset, right? So we worked with this organization, got to know them. They originate these loans around the country, and then sort of decided that we would partner with them to think about how to bring a new product to market. And so, we have had a capital markets product for 30 years, and it literally has taken us 30 years to build it, right? It is an unrated security, which you typically, and it's plugged into sort of all of the major wealth management platforms, which isn't really heard of if you couldn't do that. You couldn't start from scratch and do that today, right? We can do it because we've been doing it for 30 years, so we have a really long track record. But Enterprise does it, but they've gotten a rating, right? And so we grandfathered our kind of core business product into the market. Just maybe it was brilliance, maybe it was luck, but so we knew that we had to kind of go about creating a product that was going to plug in all the right ways, right? So we created a tranched asset-backed security. It's got a credit rating. It's got sort of all of the right sort of bells and whistles to sort of unlock capital. And we're like, cool, this is going to work, right? And it's a $400 million issuance. And we go out with the first issuance of about $50 million. And it took us 6 months to raise the capital. And we raised the capital from 73 individuals and organizations, because what we learned was and it's a product really built for institutional capital, but institutional capital wouldn't touch it until it exceeded 100 million, right? So then, fast forward a year and a half to our third issuance, and 3 institutional investors took down the whole thing, right? So it requires, and I want to be clear, not everything in the ownership economy is going to, scale to a capital markets product, right? But I think that there are a lot of opportunities to think about how to structure in ways that can take certain models to scale. And I think employee ownership, for example, is a really good one. So we have done a lot of work over the years with co-op focused business lenders like the CDFIs, who have been financing cooperatively owned businesses, and other sort of shared business models for a long time. But we have not done anything in the ESOP space. And we were introduced a year ago, almost exactly, to Phil and his team at Apis and Heritage. And we sat with them for the better part of a day with one of their LPs, who is a former colleague of ours, so kind of understands us and understands them. And she was like, you could look at just being an LP in their fund, or we could really think differently about how to create something that sort of fits our portfolio. We will be an LP, but I can't be an LP for very much of our portfolio because we are funded with a fixed income note. So I gotta be careful about where I kind of go outside the realm of being a lender. And so what we did was we structured a sidecar facility to move alongside Apis and Heritage's Legacy Fund 2 to take a piece of their deals that they bring to market, that they're trying to get these businesses to transition, but to take the senior piece of it, right? Because that was a friction point that they found in Fund 1. Fund 2, they were going to take a unitranche approach, but that also meant that their LPs, by definition, were just going to take a little bit of a lower return because they were taking both the senior and the mezz piece. And we thought, why not be a little bit more efficient in the kind of the capital? And why don't we, because we don't really have a mezz debt risk appetite, we've got more of a senior debt risk appetite, why don't we structure something and syndicate it to others like us who have more of a debt risk appetite, and reduce that friction point, get a more efficient kind of higher return for the LPs who want to take the mezz debt return, and all the while start to walk down that longer path of creating a product that would be dedicated for employee ownership, right? And so we've got a $50 million, syndicated sidecar facility. We still have room in the syndication for those who raise their hands at the investor side. And I could see sort of multiple pathways of success for this facility. One is it's a revolver. So one is these deals get refinanced by a local bank, because every business needs a local bank, and a local bank's always going to be able to do it at lower cost. So like success, great, the business has a local bank partner. Or you've got a different kind of bank partner who wants to buy bulk purchases, right? They want to buy multiple of these, and so that could be the offtake here. Or it turns into a warehouse product that then feeds an employee ownership focused CLO. Right? Like, why can't we
just say what that
think
is.
about the collateralized loan obligation, which if you go Google, it's going to be like, it's really bad and don't touch it. So I want to be clear. I don't know exactly what the structure would be yet, and Catherine, maybe you and I should talk about it. Okay, excellent. Because I'm going to talk to her because she's the one who's really doing it, right? So we want to kind of co-create this, concept, but like this is an area where like the market knows how to finance, mid-market and lower middle market companies, right? Like, why can't we take the plain vanilla market tools and apply it to employee-owned companies, right? And then just really scale it. And you've got the myriad fund managers out there who don't have to raise bigger and bigger funds each time, and you've got a larger supply of kind of capital that they know is going to accompany their deals. So,
can I double click in?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what does that kind of thing look like to you, and what would it take for you to scale?
When I say double click and challenge, so the reason why I was most interested in being a part of this is the conversation about scale, right? So there's a replication lane and there's a scale lane, right? So my first perspective is there are a lot of small initiatives that are cool. They're place-based. They're run by very passionate community development leaders, and they have just enough money to be cute and or have a little bit of impact while there's a moment of time, or to sort of fail, right? And there's a desire, I think, among the philanthropically motivated capital grant makers to seed place-based things, right? And there's a place for that. But I now know that there's a number of people that are ready to quote-unquote scale, right? So our first fund, we have $15 million. We wanted to have $20 million. We have $15 million. We now own $40-50 million of real estate. We have 2 other properties under contract. By in the first quarter, we'll have $100 million of property. The challenge is that at $100 million of asset is sort of just the threshold of viability. You got just enough money to pay a team. You got just enough money to fund the passion, but you don't have enough money to scale. Right? And scale is not only about the capital. I still believe there are probably 5 entrepreneurs in this room that are ready for $50 million of capital, $100 million capital. There's a disconnect between the cute little thing that's place-based and folks that can be national and have $50 or $100 million to scale. The disconnect for the funders in the room is so many of the concepts, and I want to challenge, so many of the concepts and the financial engineering requires a real expertise. So I'm a community developer, right? I like working in the hood. That's what's fun for me, right? I'm not a Wall Street financial analyst. But to be able to make the case for whatever a CLO is and other sophisticated financial tools, we need the ability to engage financial engineers, financial acumen, that expertise on our team, because we've demonstrated we can identify opportunities, we can deploy capital, you can get returns to people. But in order to get scale capital, you need a different level of financial expertise. You need a different level of legal expertise. So you gotta, we all have been finding for the last 5 years trying to figure out, well, who, like I know all these people in real estate, I don't know anybody, I don't really know anybody in community-owned real estate that has $50 or $100 million. I certainly don't know anybody black that has $50 million, right? But I know people that have the expertise, that have the passion, that have the basic infrastructure of a team that are saying, what do I need to do? How do we make the case? How do we work with the Prudentials and the Pritzkers and the Calverts of the world, the Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group of the world, to be able to say, do we do some type of blended capital fund, which everyone keeps saying we need to do? So my point is, the philanthropically motivated impact investor has seeded the work, and they need to be applauded, right? $1 million, $2 million, our first $15 million. And there are a number of people that have $5 to $15 million. But to really go deep, as you were saying, there's a different level of expertise, a different level of, trust-based capital, a different level of blending capital and risk, assessment, who can underwrite the risk for, the return analysis. Some people can accept a 5 or 8% return. Some people, I can't tell you the number of times over the last year I've done over 120 investor presentations where people would say, I love what you're doing. I get it, but I can't take an 8% return to our LP. So two things: I can't take an 8% return, and I don't do first-time funds. So we're going to raise another fund next year, and I think we got to figure out the only way to scale is we're going to have some people that take 5% or 2% or 8%, and some people, Goldman Sachs wants a 20%. So we got to figure out how to create a fund that can do that. That's the only way. When I say scale, it's not just about going from $100 million of assets that are communally owned to $1 billion. But it's all those other impacts. Now you got, we're in 6 communities, right? We own 7 shopping centers. But can you be in 30 communities? Can you own 40 shopping centers? Can you have 1,800 community investors? And the exponent of their work being 18,000 people that understand the rent roll, have a connection to the neighborhood. The home values appreciate without gentrification. Crime goes down. In those, we can now start to get some inferences from that work. That's what scale means. And it's capital, it's the bigger check, but it's also a deeper level of expertise and investment in the infrastructure building as well.
So what does that suggest to Santosh or Catherine in terms of, I know, Santosh, you've been thinking about how to mobilize, other LPs to get to some kind of scale. What does that suggest to you?
Yeah, I'm struck by this conversation because I feel like this is the repetitive theme of decades of work. Again and again, we come back to lots of grassroots innovation and great ideas, and then we can't find the capital to scale it. Because I just don't think there's enough philanthropic capital at 3% or 4% or 5% returns to make that happen, right? So I think Catherine's work at shaping markets and making market actors to come and take advantage of this in a way, I think is critical. The other piece that I do feel there is a significant amount of low return capital available in the world. It's public dollars. That's what we've funded every large impact innovation in the history of this country. And we just have to bring them into this conversation. And turns out ownership and participating in the upside of our community and economy and fighting against extraction is not something any politician wants to fight against. Like, I would like to see anybody across the political spectrum saying, no, we should make you poorer and we should take wealth away from you, right? Like, I think there's this core American ideal that we should tap into, and we've heard of multiple instances of how this is bipartisan. I'll just say we've had, luckily enough, 3 successful examples in Colorado where we've unlocked our $50 million into about $400 million of public dollars that are flowing into ownership. One was when we helped write a housing legislation to unlock funding for affordable housing. This is rental housing. We snuck in a piece of 3 sentences that say that every unit that's being funded by the state of Colorado through this concessionary equity program where they're taking a concession on returns, the upside will be passed along to the renters. And so quietly, there's the largest public renter wealth experiment modeled after the Enterprise Renter Wealth Fund that's happening in the state of Colorado. We probably have hundreds of thousands of renters already benefiting from it. There's a great case study that's being written by, I can guess, by this time you all know who writes the case studies in the team too. And I will probably write a foreword as a framer, but Catherine is. And then I think Heather from Aspen is, but we're excited about that. So that's an example. And then in the last legislative cycle, we had 2 wins, one on employee ownership. We said, what would it take to bring mainstream private equity investors to be enticed into participating in EO deals? So we structured a tax credit for sellers who are selling into employee ownership of some sort, whether it's broad-based or it's part of it, will get a capital gains tax break. And so that's an exciting experiment. We don't know how it's going to scale. And then there's a state investment fund. And by the way, every state has an investment fund, turns out. And we took $200 million out of that and allocated specifically for home ownership for teachers. Again, this is a great example. We have a fund focused on home ownership. It's $15 million. It's very nice. It's small. It's got about 220 homeowners, maybe 300. We said, how do we take all the lessons from that and turn it into a piece of acceptable policy that brings universal, like the idea of teachers owning homes in their communities, not rocket science. And the idea of giving them an $80,000 down payment assistance, again, it's the right thing to do. And you can still get like a meaningful return from that the state can tolerate because the treasury return they were getting is 3.5%. So it's totally fine. And that's going to benefit about 2,500 teachers in the state of Colorado, which takes our teacher home ownership rates by 20 percentage points, right? So that's the kind of solutions we think, in combination with Catherine's doing, that we really need. And I feel like that's where we're starting to see the momentum federally, or lots of policy prescriptions being put out there where ownership becomes more accessible as a tool.
So those are great examples, and as we've heard, I think in the last few days, policy is obviously one of the big levers to go to scale. Catherine, is there like a suite of ownership products that investors, in particular, institutional investors, commercial investors, could be interested in? Is ownership a asset class? I mean, how do we think about making this something that's kind of baked in across the markets?
Yeah. I don't think we can think of ownership as an asset class. I think the market understands asset classes as, I'm going to do fixed income, maybe alternative. It's not, I don't think that's probably not the right way to think about it. But I think this is one of the things that we need, more broadly in the field, because I was talking with Jen from Aspen here earlier. And I think Ida's mentioned this. Right now, we don't have a really good way to measure wealth, right? Like, don't have a good metric. We can, with touch of a button, understand the economics of a census tract and all of the federal dollars that can kind of flow in sync with that based on that census tract's position relative to the poverty line, relative to the sort of MSMA, median area income, et cetera. But we don't have a really good way to measure wealth. And I think, if we can think as a field about sort of creating those metrics, those tools, we can apply that across asset classes, right? So I think there are ways to sort of create, an ownership portfolio like Gary has, in the sort of across asset classes. But I think when we think about the products, we have to think about putting them in the very boring boxes that the market kind of understands. And I think back to the sort of shallow and deep, I think it's probably going to have to be sort of a little bit of a blending of kind of the bullseye impact deals and the better than the alternative, but not bullseye deals. And, that may be a way to blend, to get at the sort of return requirements. I just think I think we have to just start from where the market is and build toward what it needs. And, I'm going to use intermediation, David, because it's my favorite word. But, right now, there are not aside from sort of if you think, the mortgage-backed securities, right, are creating home ownership. And that's a very investable kind of understood, tool in the market, to invest in. There aren't enough investable opportunities. There aren't enough products that CIOs have to sort of allocate in across their portfolio. So I think we can be this. I think we can be this for sort of the fixed income sort of part of the spectrum. I think enterprise is doing some really interesting things in the private equity, side of the spectrum. I think, there are a number of us that I think can really think about how to be that kind of market-facing intermediary to create those products that have the impact integrity, right? And that are kind of built to meet the demand of the capital, but also at the end of the day, serve the on-the-ground community solution. And I also just want to say, in my mind, this is an exercise of sort of just broadening the pie and not reallocating the resources, because I couldn't agree more that the other factor in this moment in time is that we're staring down sort of a much lower supply of that really concessionary, public capital for sure, and probably philanthropic capital as well. And so we have to be thinking about how to grow this market in a way that isn't, directing resources away from the on-the-ground solutions, but instead encouraging those on-the-ground solution makers to think about how can you get your business model to scale? And I think that is going to require thinking a little bit differently than the way that we have as they've developed over the last 30, 40 years, right? I mean, we have developed on the back of a lot of publicly kind of enabling capital and very enabling kind of philanthropic capital, but and we have this deeply fragmented kind of array of solutions, very few of which are kind of sustainable without that ongoing supply of capital. And I think we just have to, challenge ourselves to what do models look like that are a little different and a little less dependent on that.
Yeah, and I was going to jump in. I just had a really generative thought here, which is, I don't think it's an asset class. I also felt like there was an analogy to the climate movement, where literally everything you do on your balance sheet, if you're an asset holder, wealth holder, endowment manager, has an impact on climate, I think, I would argue. I don't know enough about it. And there's a similar analogy where everything you do on your balance sheet has an impact on whether you're extracting or putting back wealth into communities. And that is true, right? I don't know how to have that conversation. We haven't gotten to that mimetic moment where we say, you're either like taking money away from people or like you're participating in the extraction or in...
This is what IDA says, right? We have no net zero inequality.
Yeah,
right?
and I don't know if it's inequality, because I don't think inequality sells. Because inequality requires me to be, I think it's something else. We haven't found the language in terms of where, even for progressive asset holders to come in and say, hey, we've looked at our endowment and we realized that over the last 100 years, the only folks that have become wealthier other than us are our managers. No offense to managers, I think you all should be wealthy. But I think it's just that there's no we've made the actual value creators in our value chain wealthier. And we are extracting because that's the way the system is. And the system is so hard to not see, right? It is what it's built on, and it works really well for the extractive behavior of capitalism. But I don't think we've found the right language, so I don't think that pigeonholing this as here's a bucket of assets, here's a unique investing pool that is special is going to work. I think we need to say it's across your entire portfolio. You hold equities everywhere. You extract wealth. In many cases, you may be putting it back. How do you make it a slightly more? You don't have to not give up on making wealth, but maybe make share a little bit more of it. And in the case of employee ownership, by sharing more of it, you actually make more, right? Our IRR on that is really good. We just haven't found the language for it, so it's definitely not an asset class.
Okay, not an asset class. Yes, possibly a suite of products, but definitely something that gets baked in across the portfolio. Almost like, as you say, your carbon footprint. You have your wealth creation footprint or your wealth extraction footprint.
Maybe the language I understand is carry. So manager carry. What about community carry? What about the people who are actually in the rental units that you own? What about the people who are actually in the businesses that you have private equity funds investing in? What about the value that they're creating? How do we make that something that maybe you feel guilty about, but maybe that's a political moment to make that into a reality that people should care about?
Yeah, and just want to double click on that. The only difference in our model is we do the financial analysis, we decide it's a return we can accept, and we slow down for 60 or 90 days and allow local people to invest on the same terms. So when I'm doing these meetings in the church basements, I'm saying, don't you want to invest on the same terms as Penny Pritzker, the former U.S. Commerce Secretary? She's a LP in our fund, right? And you slow down. So I've started to wonder, just as we talk about inclusionary housing, what if for every big project, the next tower that's built by NJ Pack, there was a period where you said, there's inclusionary investment period, right? And it's, you can invest $1,000 or $500 or $5,000. It's just a little piece. And it's available for whatever, 60 days or 6 months or 90 days, but everybody gets a chance to participate in, on the economic value that's created. That just hasn't been, that's why there's been private, equity stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're getting some. We've got a few minutes left. So does folks have, I didn't know whether we were going to do questions or not, but do folks have, I'm even less interested in questions and this generative kind of ideas like we've just been having here, if there's some other things to throw out. And you got a mic? Okay, good.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
And just introduce yourself.
Hi. Oh, okay. Good afternoon. Stephanie Fowler from the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership. We're actually just down the road here. And part of the work that we're doing is really focusing on how to increase the level of capital that's available to businesses that are currently operating. I know there's a tremendous amount of effort and energy around ESOPs and the silver tsunami, but I'm curious to know, particularly from you, Catherine, and Satosh, whether or not you have seen models that are effective for helping companies that are currently existing that do not have the capital that's necessary for them to grow their businesses. We have a number of entrepreneurs who have merchant cash advance loans at 35 to 50%, and there's room for other investors to be engaged between 5% Treasury and 50% MCA, and I just don't see the level of enthusiasm for that space of entrepreneur, which is also a form of wealth formation, and I was just curious to know if you've seen that.
Great. Let's get a few more, and then we'll give you all a chance to take your pick. Are you going to choose, or should I choose here, over here?
Hey there, my name is Katie Deal. I'm with Lafayette Square Institute, and we're actually working with Gary and with Enterprise, see Catherine here, to scale the national renter wealth model nationwide over the course of the next 2 years. Our goal over the coming year is to build the policy framework from which we can actually take this model that we know works in Colorado and that we've seen work through Enterprise, and to make sure that every single renter in every state has the opportunity to participate in this level of profit sharing. So if you're interested in it, we would love to hear your perspective. Please find me afterwards. We're actively recruiting members for the coalition.
Great. So we've got small business finance. We've got renter wealth. Let's get it, one or two more. Any others?
Thank you, y'all. An awesome session. My name is Joanna Levitt-Saya from Beloved Economies, and I want to kind of dig a little deeper on something y'all touched on a little bit, which is around the role that narrative and culture change can play for scaling, and specifically narrative and culture change with investors. And I was really struck, Lanier, by your story of the amount of investor pitches you've done when folks have been like, yeah, we can't take back this return rate. I'm involved in an initiative with dozens of organizations nationally that are doing kind of a narrative audit of the inclusive economies movement, supported by CERDNA and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and a number of other awesome partners. And there's a really high degree of interest among the groups we're talking to around, can we change cultural expectations of investors and kind of tap into that core American ethos you spoke to, Santosh, around like, who wants to extract and make poor? Like, there's groups who are saying, can we just stop saying concessionary? Can we flip the link? Can we call it restorative or fair? Can we call market rate returns extractive? You know, there's tons of things we can do, and I'm curious, do you all see potential? How do you see the role of, narrative and culture change with finance around enabling solutions like this to scale?
Okay, so let's, we're good? Why don't you each take a minute and answer the questions, but also make that your final thoughts.
Okay, so I'll hop around a little bit. So a lot of the work that we do is really educating the investor community, and we primarily focus on educating the universe of financial advisors working with individuals. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to educate them around this opportunity. I'm loving the kind of community carry concept. But I think carry is a concept that like we understand, but I think we need a concept that is much more accessible to sort of everyday individual investors who might not be familiar with what carry is in a PE fund. So I love the idea of kind of the narrative side of this.
We do too.
Yes, David does. Shifting a little bit, on a percentage basis, I would say access to finance for small business owners is nominally the biggest share of our portfolio that has been focused on kind of ownership and the thesis that sort of if you're owning a business that can be a wealth generating thing, you need access to responsibly kind of structured credit, right, to grow your business. And so we work with a number of CDFIs around the country who work with small business owners, and I'm happy to talk with you offline about some of those that we work with in New Jersey. Forgetting the middle. And awesome, Katie. I'm so psyched to hear you're taking that model national. So cool.
Well, my broader reflection is movements are hard, right? And they're not like, you can make a grant to make a movement happen. And we just need, I think the communities act in a way where we come together with a shared ideal. We believe in the ideal and we don't have to believe in the same ideas. And that to me is the call out that we're in this movement. We're privileged to be in this movement. I'm like lucky to be an immigrant here and questioning the roots of American capitalism. Luckily, I'm a citizen, so I can't be sent out anywhere. But I feel like that to me gives me courage.
I don't know, today.
Please. But that to me gives me confidence that this is like a courageous moment. And I think, the reframing our narrative is a central part of it, and work you all do. David and I were talking, his first article on ESOP was written in 1986 when he was 11 years old, so, it's true. And I think that, how do we think about return, non-extractive, competitive, whatever framing we want to use. But I just want to say that, let's think about the sheer opportunity we have in front of us, and try to go out and find our own joy and our own beauty and our own genius in being part of this movement, and that's the call out.
And I'd love to be a part of a narrative change, right? I always feel like, wealth supremacy, that's what I deal with every day, right? And, I want to figure out how to talk about that in a more positive way. My business coach says, how can you talk to capital like that and you're asking people to invest in you? You're mad at capital. So if you can help me get some language that doesn't sound like I'm mad at capital, I'm in. We need it.
One reading suggestion, Narrative Economics by Robert Schiller. So join me in thanking our panel and all of you, Lanier, Catherine, Santos. Thank you.